and Studies, Geneva, Switzerland. He is also a CPA Tanzania. This is certified public accountant in Tanzania. I can assure you the CV is huge, massive. Mr. Wanga, thank you for coming. And today he is going to present on challenges and dynamics of economic partnership agreement and regional trade. Our discussant is Professor Dennis Oikuliza, who is head of Department of General Management with Masters and PhD in International Trade. Can we put together our hands to presenters and discussants? John, you have 20 minutes. The floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I don't feel the energy. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Honorable former Prime Minister, honorable former ministers, it's my pleasure this morning to be with you and spend about 20 minutes putting down my thoughts, probably my confusions here and there on the challenges and dynamics of economic partnership agreements and regional trade, especially with respect to Africa. When I saw Balozi Amina, she's a great trade negotiator at even African continent level. I kind of thought she probably should have been the presenter this morning. So it's kind of tricky to present in front of her and of course many other experts. I have put down my thoughts along the lines of the outline I am showing there. And I should say from the very beginning that these thoughts are mine and they do not represent any of the institutions that I work for. And in the context of Centennial anniversary of Mwalimu Nyerere, everything I'm going to say, in the back of my mind, I'll be thinking of what would Mwalimu have said or thought on this topic. So that's also the confusion or the challenge that I had. We all know that Mwalimu was an ardent believer of regional integration. Very, very strong believer of political integration, very strong believer of economic integration, of economic cooperation at continental level. EAC was the minimum unit that at least he could succeed to some extent. So he believed in the collective power of the African continent. He believed that regional integration is one of the best ways to create a strong and self-reliant Africa. He was also an ardent believer of the power of the Global South and the importance of the Global South to cooperate economically. Actually, when he became the chair of the South Commission, which is one of the assignments he did with a lot of passion at international level, he became even more convinced and with a lot more conviction on the urgent need for the economic South to cooperate. So he advocated for better cooperation within the economic South, but he also advocated for better cooperation between the economic South and the economic North. I've cited some of what he said in his speeches. For example, when OAU, the then OAU, met in Lagos in 1980, and in his speech, he said it's obvious that it is largely through regional cooperation that we shall build up the effective strength of Africa, both internally but in relation to the outside world. Oh, okay, so technology usually has its way. Also, he said in a speech he did in Mauritius in 1974 that we poor nations will not easily or quickly be able to force a change in the current world trade systems, but we could help ourselves more than we do, and we can only do that by cooperation. So, in the context of Mwalimu's thinking ideas, the presentation attempts to highlight some of the issues facing Africa today in the context of trade, especially trade within itself and trade with the rest of the world. And when we talk about the rest of the world, we'll talk about economic partnership agreements, which I should say also from the very beginning is one of the most contested trading arrangements in the recent history. So we attempt to respond to 3 questions, or put my ideas on 3 questions. How has the economic partnership agreement, or how have the economic partnership agreements benefited African countries? To what extent are they compatible with World Trade Organizations? But the bigger question are what are the challenges of increasing regional trade? Now, economic partnership agreements are a series of trade agreements that the European Union and about 79 countries in Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific have agreed to implement in order to make trade relations between those 2 regions better, but also compliant to WTO rules and regulations. So they are negotiated between the EU and regional blocs in African countries, and are meant to promote gradual integration of African economies into global markets, including supporting African businesses to increase their participation in regional and global value chains. And you'll see in the subsequent slides, we'll show how small the share of Africa trade is in the global trade. So in EPA, EU commits to eliminate tariffs fully. So the emphasis there is the elimination of tariffs. While the African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries are expected to reduce the tariffs between 40 to 97%. Tariffs are supposed to be reduced, and this reduction will apply to between 75 to 95% to 97% of the goods that will be imported from Europe. But some sectors will be more protected, especially agriculture, textiles, because of the impact on agriculture, of agriculture on the GDP of developing countries, especially those in Africa. And also, ACP countries, that means Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific, can eliminate these tariffs on a prolonged period of over 25 years, while allowing their industry, so a bit of protection, while allowing their industries to adjust to those changes in trade patterns. But those countries that are not currently implementing EPA, and here we'll also talk about Tanzania, there are also other ways of accessing the EU markets. And 2 major ways is an arrangement called Everything But Arms. You can sell everything to Europe but arms. And for those that are economically a bit more developed, they will use what is called GSP, Generalized System of Preferences, or GSP plus schemes. Now, the EPA conversations have started around 2002, and they've been going on since. And the main objectives, as I say, is to promote trade and to ensure sustainable development. But one of the main concerns of the partnership, of the EPA, which has been notable in most studies, and even done by the Europeans themselves, is this aspect of reciprocation, that I open my gates and you open your gates. Now, what you're saying, and I think this is what free trade is saying, but what Mwalimu will say, yes, we are free to trade with Europe, we are free to sell in Europe, and we want them to be free to come. But are we really free? In terms of tariffs, we could be free. But in terms of other non-tariff measures, are we really free? So that's one of the major concerns. And of course, the other concern is around fragmented nature of the trade policy among countries. as well as, and I will say in the next slides, the presence of multiple regional economic communities in Africa and probably outside Africa. So some of the countries, including Tanzania, including Nigeria, etc., have held a stance of saying, wait a minute, we should know and should be very confident on what we are getting ourselves. And one of the main reasons was the threats that these agreements pose on industrialization. If we open our gates so wide, are we allowing the risk of imported goods being very cheap at the expense of locally produced through our local manufacturing capacity? These are the discussions. Now, by saying that, I am not propagating protectionism, but what I'm saying is there's always a need to say, yes, we want free trade, but to what extent that free trade can be at the expense of local industrialization efforts that we are having. So, various studies that I have seen and have gone through have concluded that it's not the lack of increase of exports from beneficial countries like Tanzania, but it is the imports. Yes, we can have more access to the European markets, but as I said earlier, one of the concerns is not about tariffs, it can be tariff-free, but what we call technical barriers to trade, or non-tariff barriers, which include issues of standards, conformity, and things of that sort. Those are probably even bigger barriers. Studies have shown if you remove that, there's also a potential, there's actually a potential of our exports to Europe to increase fourfold, even if you don't do a lot on the tariff. So if you look at the EAC, negotiations between EU and EAC were technically concluded in 2014, and then later Kenya, Rwanda actually signed the agreement, but the remaining of the EAC have not signed. Of course, there is flexibility. The EU says there's flexibility. You can sign with some countries in the regional bloc, but our rules as EAC, especially because of the customs union, we have all to sign for it to be effective. So that's where we are. So for Tanzania, as I said, our concerns are three: that EPA will not go beyond the European Development Fund, concerns that EPA will limit Tanzania from commitments to other agreements because we also want to trade with others, but also the fear of disruption on domestic competitiveness or industrial competitiveness. I will skip this because I think I'll talk about this is how much trade, around 5% of our external trade is with EAC, also close to 8 to 9% is with COMESA, close to 10% is with EU, and about 11 or 12% is with SADC, and then we have a huge percentage with the BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. So it means, much as yes, there is a significant amount of trade we are doing with EU, but we are actually trading more with SADC, trading more with COMESA, trading a lot with EAC, and trading a lot with the BRIC. So do we need to get better trading arrangements? Should we prioritize this, or should we prioritize this to ensure we have more access to these countries, and then deal with with EU as and when it is necessary? Sorry, my slides are advancing. So there was a question that asked, are EPAs compatible with WTO rules? I wouldn't want to go into the details because that subject is also controversial. In my opinion, if you look at the rules of WTO, and if you look at the exceptions, especially the exception on the concept of the most favored nations, you can as well say yes. The bigger part of the conversation today, and I thought this could be, fortunately I only have about 5 minutes, I think, is around regional trade in Africa. This graph, or this chart, shows how much various global blocks are trading. The blue part shows how much they are trading within themselves, and the orange part shows how much they are trading with other parts of the world. Look at Africa. We are around, it's only about 17 to 18% of what we are exporting, for example, in Tanzania, goes to Africa. A lot of our export trade depends on going to the rest of the world. Look at Europe. Much as we're saying, we might be flooded with European goods, but 68% of the trade exports from European countries are actually going to other European countries. So what it means is there's a lot of untapped potential for African trade if we are to trade more within ourselves. And this is where the current conversation, and now this is where the current conversation is, and one of the challenges we have in Africa, I think we're the continent with the most regional trading economic blocks. All those blocks that we are seeing here are somewhere in Africa. ECOWAS, IGAD, SADC, ECAS, EAC, COMESA, and you see, so one country could be a member of this and this and this and this, and every one of those economic blocks have trading arrangements, and you have to try to comply with this, to comply. Some countries have decided to be members of those blocks, but they are not complying to anything. So this also results into difficulties of increasing intra-Africa trade. Now, a big step that has happened and in the right direction is the establishment of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And I think these are some of the conversations that Balozi Amina was involved from the very beginning. So she knows the AFCFTA like the back of her hand. And actually, it makes AFCFTA, in principle, the largest trading bloc in the world after the WTO, in terms of the numbers of the countries involved and the potential. And if Mwalimu was here, this is what probably would be weeping in happiness. Finally, we are talking about an African economic collaboration at continental. And so if you ask me, our conversation today should not be about how much you want to trade with Europe, but what can we do to trade more within Africa. So industrialization potential, and there's an estimate, UNECA, says the UN Economic Commission for Africa, estimates that AFCFTA can increase regional trade, intra-Africa trade to 52%. So that means from around 17, 18% to 52%. That is threefold increase of intra-Africa trade. I've also given a quote, but in the interest of time. So if you look at AFCFTA, it has a potential of increasing industrialization, exports, intra-Africa trade, everything. The opportunities of the benefits, boosting intra-Africa trade, accelerating industrialization, intra-African FDI. Whenever we talk about FDI, foreign direct investment, our focus as Africans is to go outside Africa to look for investments. But to what extent are we nurturing African investors to invest in Africa? AFCFTA also presents such an opportunity. But also increasing employment, because once you increase trade, you increase industrialization, you increase investment, therefore you also increase trade, employment. Now there is a myriad of challenges. And this is somewhere, I think Mwalimu said, we have, no, Mwalimu said, let me read from We cannot effectively build up internal or inter-African trade until we have reduced the present difficulties of moving goods, moving people, and information about nations and about our continent. There are myriad of issues, and I think as policymakers, as academicians, as future policymakers, we should think, what can we do about these inward-looking policies? Geographical location of some countries are disadvantaged. Cumbersome border crossing. If you go, I read my organization, Trademark East Africa, one of the biggest of interventions we do is to build one for border cross. And in East Africa, we have constructed 17 again. In Tanzania, we have helped the government to build 4. I think Kolili, Mutukula, Kabanga, and Tunduma. Now, if you go through Tunduma and go into DRC through Zambia, there is a border called Kasumbalesa. Honorable Pinda, you probably know that border. Currently, my colleagues were there like three weeks ago. If you have to cross that border, there is a queue, traffic, of over 50 kilometers of cars waiting to cross. And most of those trucks are actually coming from the Dar Es Salaam port. So a container that might have taken 2 or 3 weeks from China to Dar es Salaam will probably take a month and a half or 2 months to arrive to Lubumbashi. Cumbersome border crossing processes. High cost of doing business and money. Our infrastructure don't support it. You know, during Independence Days, we talked about connecting Cape Town to Cairo. Is it possible today? No. Or from Dar es Salaam to Dakar. Is it possible? The day that can happen. Or, if you want to buy something online from Nigeria, which website do you visit? You can easily go to Alibaba and get things from China. You can easily go to Amazon, get things from the US. You can easily go to eBay, get things from Europe or elsewhere. Which website do you go to get something from Malawi? So our systems, our infrastructure have not underlying economic challenges, credit to private sector, limited information on African products, I've given that example. Also conflicts. Just think of the route from Dar es Salaam to Dakar. How many war zones will you pass through? Rebels, terrorists, whatever, bandits, and things of that sort. So it means it's the interest of Africa. And also, again, Mwalimu was an ardent believer of peace building. Peace helps integration. Without peace, there's no integration. So, Madam Chair, I've eaten 2 minutes, so let me just conclude. But Africa, which is a fast-growing regional trade, has a high potential to boost inter-regional trade, as well as ensuring sustainable growth. It's also key to ensuring the resilience. Africa has been very dependent on global value chains, but COVID proved to us that our dependence on global value chains is shaky. Now the war in Ukraine from those global shocks. So matters I'm not saying don't build EPA. Let's discuss, let's negotiate, get a better deal on EPA to get access to the European market, but let's put a lot of emphasis on supporting or increasing intra-Africa trade, reducing non-tariff barriers within the continent. I would love to leave you with this quote. Mwalimu said, and this is in a speech entitled An Obituary of the East African Community, when the EAC, the then EAC, was formally being wound up in 1984. He said, decisions relating to our economies are being made every day. If we do not make them in the context of East African cooperation, and probably now in the context of African cooperation, our countries will be constantly moving further and further away from each other, and along different routes to the same destination of economic stagnation. As policymakers, we are making decisions as academicians. We are advising policymakers every day. Are we advising them in the context of African integration or individual country units, and therefore moving towards economic stagnation? Asanteni sana kwa kunisikiza.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ulanga. Some issues, key issues. Economic partnership agreements, are they compatible with WTO rules? But how can we trade? The key question, what can we do to trade more between ourselves within Africa? Increase intertrade. But more, he says, Tanzania is in between Cape Town and Cairo. We know that. Specifically, if you stand in Arusha, you're standing in between Cairo and Cape Town. Let's use that. Together we stand. Discussion, Karim.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. Honorable former Prime Minister, Kayanza Peter Pinda, Honorable former Ministers, Honorable Ambassador Amina, Your Eminence Bishop Shayo, other leaders in attendance, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you very much, Mr. John Ulanga, for your insightful presentation. And it's my pleasure to share my knowledge in relation to what you presented. Dear participants, gone are the times of autarky, where countries around the world used to operate in isolation from the rest of the world. That internal closure and inside looking can no longer help us. So that means going international is inevitable. It's an imperative of our time. But again, trade without discipline could cause harm to our economy and the people thereof. So we needed to act. You know, the economic partnership agreements between the European Union and the East African Community partner states has got its own advantages and disadvantages. But as it stands now, the advantages are much less compared to disadvantages. The many features, even before the EPA, in the context of East African Community geographical configuration is signed and ratified, there are already some hiccups that we needed to work on before it is signed and ratified. Yes, it is geared towards making the entire trade arrangement between these regions compatible with the WTO principles, particularly trade without discrimination and predictability. But again, we have a leeway to work on that because there is a provision in the WTO GATT 1994 that allows these least developed countries to come together in the form of regional trade arrangements. But again, there is an enabling clause that needs developed countries to extend assistance to the least developed countries, even some developing ones. So we still have that flexibility to work on and to seize as an opportunity. Yes, EPA or EPAs generally promise immediate duty-free, quota-free access to the European market for the East African Community partner states with the exports. But again, this comes with some sort of reciprocity, just like Mr. John Ulanga put it correctly. But again, this is tantamount to, for instance, hiring a shopkeeper without anything to sell within the shop. So what do we have to reciprocate? Do we have anything? So in my own view, Much as trade is very important, but again, the East African Community Partner States can by no means trade with the European Union on the same footing. They are giants, well established, with experience and what have you. There are trade defense measures that come with EPAs. For instance, these trade remedies could come in the form of countervailing duties to counter for subsidies and anti-dumping measures. But again, we don't have the strong machinery to see to it that these are effected on the ground. We still have a long way to go as the least developed country. There are rules of origin that come with EPAs, but still, just like Mr. Olanga put it correctly, we can already see some sort of, from what he presented, we already see some sort of export trade deflection. Tanzania and other partner states in the East African community are not exporting much to the so-called preferential markets, especially outside Africa. They are exporting to markets other than preferential ones. So that means we can do something much better by building our own production and export capabilities. EU's everything but arms that Olanga mentioned remains available so long as Tanzania and other least developed countries within the East African community remain least developed. And we are still least developed, much as the World Bank gave us the status of lower middle income economy. This is different from what the WTO uses. The World Bank classification is quite different from the UN classification, which is used by the WTO. So we have all the advantages as the least developed country, and we shall remain a least developed country until Tanzania meets the UN graduation threshold for economic vulnerability index to allow the country to graduate from the LDC group of countries. That is yet to be met, and I don't think we are meeting it tomorrow or the day after. So can still capitalize on the opportunities that come with the category of the least developed countries. Additional costs that come with EPAs would be paying for imports, losing our revenue that come with the imports from Europe. We are importing more from Europe, and unfortunately we're importing finished goods. And we're exporting unprocessed products or even raw materials. That means we're exporting employment opportunities. And we are on the dark side because we are losing a lot in terms of spillover effects. So with an exception of Kenya, for all other East African Community Partner States, the main benefit of the Economic Partnership Agreement is the avoidance of additional duties on exports to their markets. But again, there is an export trade deflection. We are not exporting that much to those markets compared to non-tariff, non-preferential markets outside Africa. So we have a weak export basket, export sector that cannot be attributed to the factor-seeking foreign direct investment on our part. We don't have a lot of foreign direct investment that are factor-seeking, that are backward integrated to use our raw materials as inputs for production and generation of employment opportunities within the country. That's not that much on the ground. So we still have to work on this one and to see to it that we have factor-seeking foreign direct investment so that we can have some sort of local content increased and the backward integration increased as well. Unfortunately, as it stands now, EPAs are limited to tariffs and exports, forgetting other modes of foreign market entry like greenfield investment, foreign direct investment, franchising, licensing, and what have you. So exports, yes, is the cheapest way for least developed countries to enter advanced economies, but again, we need some sort of reciprocity from advanced economies to come in the form of foreign direct investment to our countries. So what matters would not be tariffs nowadays. What matters would be the non-tariff measures. The tariffs are decreasing in the developed countries. If you look at the binding overhang, which is the difference between the most favored nation tariff applied to all WTO members and the boundary tariffs, this is increasing at a breakneck speed among developed countries. And that means we can still trade without tariffs, because tariffs are not lowering. But again, they are lowering at the same time. The NTMs, non-tariff measures, are increasing, and these non-tariff measures are very difficult for our public and the private enterprises to abide by. They come in the form of technical barriers to trade and the sanitary and the phytosanitary measures. I'm nearly done, Madam Chairperson. So alongside that same phenomenon, we have the very small difference between preferential tariffs and the most favored nation tariff applied, or tariffs applied in the developed countries, meaning that there is some sort of preferential erosion. What we see as preferences that come in the form of tariffs are eroding because there is little difference between the giants that are well established, given their technological advancement and our capability to tap those preferences. So tariffs do not matter a lot. That said, allow me, Madam Chairperson, to share with you some 3 points to drive home. One, just like we cannot export everything, our country needs not to subject itself to agreements that will eventually make it import everything. We need to strategically and selectively protect our economy by exporting products for which we have abundant resources and importing products for which we have scarce resources. And this is permissible within WTO, Article 10, Section B and C. We are allowed to protect our economies. Generally, Tanzania exports more to non-African markets than it does in African markets, while within Africa, Tanzania exports more to the preferential markets. Outside Africa, the country exports more to non-preferential markets. Therefore, building the right capacities to invest, to produce, and to export could help us avoid over-reliance on the preferential markets, particularly which emerge in the form of generalized system of preferences, which are best enablers. So we have to address the technological gap and the market gap that we are suffering from. Put together, we should fight a dog before combating a lion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We do have some few minutes, very few minutes, for discussion or comments or questions. Who is to start? Yes, karibu. Mike. There's one here, please. Karibu sana.
Thank you so much for your polished presentation, and Madam Chair. Mine is an observation, maybe a question as well. The challenge of EPA. I think, Mr. John, it is a reality you probably, based on your foundation. You may have to come to realize that there's some form of trend that we may, and this includes me as well, tend to believe that something that comes from Europe is more legitimate. They call it actually legit than something that is, produced in Africa. Don't you think there's a question or an issue of the mindset change of consumers that probably should be addressed in order to boost the intra-Africa trade? I think we may have a discussion along those lines. Asante.
Thank you. Can you give it to the gentleman in front? Dr. Koyamba, karibu.
Thank you, Chairperson. I have a question to Professor Wembiza. In your presentation, you said something which has struck me, that the UN classifies Tanzania as a least developed country, whereas the World Bank, I think, classifies it as a low middle income kind of a country. So where are we exactly? Because we are getting confused with these kind of statements. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussing the discussant. Yes, can you bring the mic in front here?
Thank you very much. Good morning. I really very thoroughly enjoyed the presentation. And I just wanted to build on it by asking, was there any obligation for us to entertain a conversation about EPAs to start with? Normally, in a reciprocal relationship, there should be a mutual interest. And what we observed was that the EU tended to go around about the EPA proposal with a stick in its hands, almost threatening Africans that if we did not engage with them on EPAs, then we would be locked out, as it were. And where the stick was not applied, the bribe was offered. Break ranks if you are part of ECOWAS, as with Senegal, break ranks with ECOWAS and sign a bilateral EPA with us, and you get some extra $1 million, and so on and so forth. Second observation, why is it in the history of Africa's development that at every point where we have made an effort to do something for ourselves, the world that loves us so much comes with a counter proposal to derail us? We are preparing to finish the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. EPAs were immediately introduced. And that dissipated the energies of so many of us, including Ambassador Amina, who has to spend plenty of time responding to the Europeans instead of focusing on our own concerns. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ulanga, do you want to respond, or we continue to? Yes.
I will just throw my thoughts on some of the questions. The mindset change. First, I'll tell you, the mindset is already changing. I'll give you an example. 68% of what we export as Tanzania to the rest of Africa is actually manufactured goods. While maybe 70 or 80% of what we're exporting to the rest of the world are raw and processed products. So it means Africa is already open to importing things from other African countries that are actually manufactured. So there is, when you talk about value addition, if Bakresa, for example, processes flour, do you think they can sell that flour to the United States or to the UK? But they can sell it to Malawi, they can sell it to DRC, they can sell that to Kenya, and they do sell that to all those countries. The milk that we are seeing, Tanga Fresh or Lato from Uganda, do you think you can find it in the shelves in there? So the mindset is already changing. And with improved technology and production capacities, I think Africans are already accepting a lot more. Colleagues of mine were in West Africa recently, and colleagues were asking them, if you are to facilitate connection with other regions of the continent, where would you want to trade with more? And they said, East Africa. They're more organized, the quality of the products are high. So that mindset is changing, but yes, we need to do a lot to remove that mentality. But again, if you go to the supermarkets, or to even sophisticated shops or the electronics that you're buying, how many of them are written made in UK? Actually, even those industries now have moved from Europe and the US, have moved to China. That's why the graph I showed the longest of the bar chart is actually BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Was there any obligation? Now, remember, this conversation around EPA started, was a post-Cotonou agreement conversation. And the Cotonou agreement was more around aid. But now the world has moved. Now we have moved from aid to trade. Our relations with the West or with the economic North are actually more defined by trade than by aid. And therefore, that's why you could see in a way EPA is kind of losing its relevance, because that incentive called aid is already kind of declining. And I meet most of these foreign delegations when they come. The conversation is not about how much aid we can give you, it's about how much trade we can do with you. So it gives Africa a better position to negotiate on equal footing. And I agree with you. Africa has the biggest potential, both as a source of raw materials, but also as a market. You know, currently there's about 1.4 billion people living in Africa. That's about 16% of the global population. But project 20 years from now, most of you, especially up there, will be there. 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 2050, 25% of the global population will be living in Africa. A quarter of the population. So everyone is already looking at Africa for now and for future. So you rather have them more integrated to the global trading system than allowing us to integrate among ourselves. So for us, especially as leaders, we have to think futuristic. What we are doing now around AFCFTA is a huge potential of creating a very strong economic bloc the world have ever seen. Asante sana.
Wow, futuristic. More questions, more comments? Only 3. Okay, 1, 2. Yes, I'll be back to you.
Thank you. My name is David from TAR Consulting. I come from Uganda. Thank you so much, Professor John, for that great presentation. On the question of what can we do to trade within ourselves, as the graph that you showed, the intertrade among African countries. And my question comes to, at what instance, a level of especially country-to-country engagements that, of course, we have had a trademark helping smoothening trade among the East African bloc, and we would want to have more light on that, especially in regards to, of course, we believe we have high commissions within, we have Ugandan High Commission in Tanzania, we have Tanzanian High Commission in Uganda and different countries. And my input would be, at what extent are these, can call maybe a branch of Tanzania in Uganda? What are those initiatives? At the moment I've been here in Tanzania, I'm not seeing those initiatives that the Ugandan embassy is saying, hey, this is the export volume between Tanzania and Uganda. How is that information shared? At what extent? That we can have such platforms where we can be able to know the export volume. If you're just asked a question, I'm from Uganda, you're from Tanzania, at the fingertips, do we know the ratio between Tanzania and Ugandan export ratio? because you can't improve what you've not measured. So in what you, as Mr. John, what are you doing in that context, in that line to boost and to accelerate the export ratio within especially the East African country? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Saidi Ramadan from the University of Dar Es Salaam. I'm a student of Political Science and Public Administration. I'm honored and with respect to speak in front of you. I wanted to comment on the presentation. I heard about the number of people in Africa, which is 1.4 billion. In relation to the number of European nations, for example, currently we have shakes in our economy. For the challenge facing the number of 44 million people in Ukraine and the number of Russian people. I think that we are not enough to stand ourselves because we have no capacity and we have no technology. Instead of staying alone we are the market, we can again be the customer for the European or for the advanced nation, so that we can buy the technology, so that we can use that technology in our countries to develop ourselves. We are not enough to stand alone. We should use the universal standards so that we can improve as others have improved. Thank you.
Now I'm inviting, yes, just behind.
Good morning. My name is, thank you, madam. My name is Karen Daniel. I'm come from Yusuf Makamba Secondary School. Question.
Excellent.
Question to Mr. Ulanga. How can we improve and support the regional trading of Tanzania? Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'm inviting first of all, Professor Deus to respond to the question from Dr. Koyamba, and then we finish with the presenter. Karibu.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson, and Dr. Koyamba, for your question. The World Trade Organization is the one responsible for governing international trade. If you may leave him free for some minutes, please. Yes, the World Trade Organization, Dr. Koyamba, is the one responsible for governing international trade around the world. And the responsibility of the World Bank is different, and the classification of countries by the World Trade Organization is grouped into three: developed countries, developing countries, and the least developed countries. It is these three groups that we use in trade negotiations, and these groups could be traced back to the colonial era. So they are primarily attributed to the colonial days. And the World Bank categorizes countries into four. We have the low-income economies, the lower middle-income economies, where Tanzania is today. We have the upper middle-income countries and the high-income countries. This is different. Within the UN framework that WTO uses, it's only the least developed countries that have got some sort of true economic indicators, but others are political. Madam Chairperson, I don't know whether or not you can allow me to contribute a bit to other questions. For instance, the one of mindset. This comes with some sort of a snag. It needs some sort of mass awareness campaigns and good political will, be it from whole parties, because it comes with a political challenge. You can't protect what you are capable of producing, and you are formally importing from outside with the high quality, with the low prices, and all of a sudden close it outside, and thinking that you can remain safe, because this will affect the producer surplus, whereas the consumer surplus will be very high, the demand will be very high, production will be very low, because you are at the initial stages of development. So people should understand, for sectors that we are capable of in terms of the available natural fact endowment and the other capabilities in terms of marketing and the technological advancement, should be done by us, and there will be some sort of suffering for some time. You can't avoid it. And if you go on importing, you will by no means realize what probably you're intending to. There was another question relating to increasing intra-Africa trade. Yes, this can be done, because can be done by using our own enterprises. The indigenous enterprises should be incentivized so that they come to the same footing of competition with the rest of the world. And this will come bit by bit. It doesn't come to the reality overnight. It takes time. We need the foreign direct investment, but the foreign investors are normally footloose. For those who are speaking Swahili, mguu moja uko ndani, mguu mwingine unakuwa nje. Anytime we provoke them, they run away. So it's very important for us to nurture our own enterprises, bit by bit, so that we can catch up. So without this one, you'll be creating some sort of complacence and over-dependence on foreign goods for nothing. You shall be doing it on parallel. Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson.
Thanks, Professor Rumbiza. I think you've made my life easy. So quickly, colleague from Uganda. I was in Uganda, for example, a week and a half ago. And the conversations that we're having with colleagues in Uganda, there's an election coming up in Kenya. So they're already saying, how can we make sure our trade goes through Tanzania in case there's instability? But for me, it was further than that, that if they also find Tanzania a more stable route, what can we do as Tanzania to ensure this route is very reliable? You see? Now, we need to have those conversations, business forums between these countries. They were complaining on something very interesting. They were saying the balance of trade between Uganda and Tanzania is in favor of Tanzania because we imported, I think they were valuing, I think, around $700 million worth of imports from Tanzania, and we only have exported 10% of that. I gave them this particular statistic. Out of the 700 million that they imported from Tanzania, 600 million, and you'll be surprised, was unprocessed gold. Uganda, the bishop is surprised, Uganda imports unprocessed gold from Tanzania over $500 million annually. And what do? They process, they import, you process, and you export as Ugandan products. But for me, who is looking at East Africa as a region, those are what we call regional value chains. You create value chains regionally, because for us, it doesn't matter, we have exported. But it means if Uganda decides to be the center for processing, you're giving that advantage. So when I gave them that statistic, I said, look, so in your exports, when you pride yourselves that you are exporting gold, 600 million of that actually came from Tanzania. So those type of conversations of saying we are all gaining when we collaborate, and there's no winner and loser. Said, I like your line of thought, but it needs to sharpen a bit more. When we say we should integrate, we're not saying we should isolate. There's a difference. between regional integration and regional isolation. So we are not saying, and this is what Mwalimu would have said, Madaraka knows a lot more, we should maximize the utilization of internal capacity before we go outside. The graph I showed that Europe, 68% of trade in Europe is within Europeans. And then the remaining 32 is the rest. Now, it doesn't mean they have isolated, but it means they have maximized the internal capacity for trade, which means less NTBs, etc. So that's all what I am saying, and not integration is not isolation. The young girl from Yusuf Makamba, excellent question. And for me, three things. One, let's remove NTBs, non-tariff barriers. Last year, when the President Samia Suluhu Hassan went to Kenya and had discussions with the President of Kenya, and they addressed quite a lot of NTBs. You know who benefited from that conversation? Tanzania. Our exports to Kenya in a period of about 1 year increased, I think, probably, now I am afraid we have, but probably four, 5, or 6 times. Whenever there is a trading conflict between Tanzania and Kenya, we lose, because our balance of trade is usually in our favor. Kenya is very independent in terms of agricultural produce from Tanzania. So NTBs is number one. NTBs are not helpful. And that's why I even say, even with Europe, if we remove non-tariff barriers, our export to Europe could increase fourfold. Number two, infrastructure. Improve infrastructure. In East Africa, our biggest trading partner is Kenya, but we don't have a functional railway between Tanzania and Kenya. Number three, attract investment. The more you invest, the more you can export.
I believe you will agree with me. We will need to listen and contribute more. But time is not in our favor. There is a health break before we continue with the next session. Can we put together our hands to the presenter? And to the discussant. And maybe to the chair. Thank you so much. Karibu chai.